Welcome back to the Profit Builder Unscripted. I'm super excited you're here. And today we're going to be talking about how do you invest in time and energy into training your team so that they can really be their best versions of themselves and be successful at actually taking ownership in their jobs. All right, let's jump in. And I'm super excited to have my guest, Greg Rehm, here with Liberty Hill Construction today. And we're going to be talking about how do you have a good job handoff process, which is really critical to being able to have projects go smoothly when you spend the time at the front end. So first of all, Greg, thanks so much for being here and being a guest on the Profit Builder.
You're welcome, Vicki.
Greg and I just met recently as he responded to a request I put out there looking for someone who has expertise in the area of job handoff process specifically. And I have to tell you that I'm going to let Greg introduce himself in a second, but I so appreciated our initial conversation and hearing about his process and just really his process for running projects in general, because he's very you have a lot of great systems and processes and you're very organized in your approach, and clearly it's made a big difference in terms of your ability to be consistently profitable on projects and have them run smoothly. So before we have some questions that we've come up with that I'm going to ask you about this whole topic of job handoff process and what's your approach to it and like that. But before we jump into those questions, would you just tell people a little bit about you and about your business, and then we'll jump in.
Sure. So I'm the owner of Liberty Hill Construction. We are a full service design, build, remodeling company in Bedford, New Hampshire. We celebrated our 22nd year in business, and I was doing this on my own for 6 years prior to that, and in the industry for several after college. So I've got about 30 years in the construction industry, and our team is built from myself alone to now we have 9 full-time employees and use a lot of trade partners and specialty contractors.
Great.
We're in a small community, and we're kind of we fill a nice niche for the community that we mainly work in.
Nice. That's great. That's great. Well, thank you. So, when we, you've been doing this for quite a while. You have a lot of experience of doing it on your own, doing it with a team, that completely different dynamic, right? Greg, the first question I think that's good for us to tackle is, why is it important to have a job handoff process? And maybe we even just would be a good place to start by defining, what does that mean to have a job process, and why do you see that it's important?
So I think, in our industry, particularly, most people start out as a sole proprietor. They wear every hat, and they don't have any need to communicate information to themselves. It's all stored in their head. But as you hire your first employee and start growing, you suddenly discover that you have to extract the information in your head and pass it along to team members. And that's the birth of any handoff process is, hey, I can't be everywhere and every person on the team, so I need to create a system to transfer that information. And that's the essence of the handoff process, or the startup.
Yeah. You just touched on a couple of things that I think are really important, that really have to do with how do you grow your business. And one of them is, you said, when you shift from being the sole proprietor and it's all between your two ears, all in your head, and now when you're growing and you hire people and you have to communicate more of that detail to other people, that is I've seen that be such a challenging thing for a lot of contractors in their early stages of growth. And that ability to be able to get what and all the information that you've gathered in and selling a job, estimating a job, to get it to the production team so that they can produce it at the same level you estimated at, really requires a lot more intentional thinking and practices, which is what you're talking about, like developing the handoff process, comes out of that need and that ability to be able to get what's between our, two ears, as I say, or it's in our head, as you said, down in a way that other people can understand and use it and know it. What was the impetus for you? I mean, you had to go through this transition at some point, right? What was the impetus for you? What was the thing that, I always say that the thing that causes us to create any change as human beings is usually there's something that's not working. There's something that some pain or some breakdown that's reoccurring, or there's a highly desired state that's unfulfilled. Like those are the things that inspire us or drive us to make change happen, because change isn't necessarily easy. What was the thing for you? What was the point at which you said, man, I got to figure out a different way?
That's a good question. And for me, I love change. And I realized I started learning trade in the field, carpentry mostly, and others. But what I discovered was what I loved was the business side. And so I dug in as I moved through the years into processes and building a company that could repeat the things that it did and deliver. Our motto is a predictable and stress-free experience. So for me, the the big impetus there was, as much as I loved doing things in the field, I loved building the business and working on the business to help other people be successful in other positions. And the company
So,
as a whole became successful.
yeah, that's awesome. I don't see that very often. I mean, I think people have the desire, contractors have the desire to grow their business and to have it become bigger and hire people and build great teams and deliver a quality experience. And so many times a lot of entrepreneurs don't have that muscle, that they don't come to it with like, oh, I love the systems, the process side of it, right? They love the work part of it, and they don't necessarily have that natural ability, as it sounds like maybe you do and did, to create the systems and the processes to let you do that. So I really admire that you have that ability and you came with that ability. And I'm sure that you've had to teach your team along the way to do this job handoff process, right? Like at this point, it's, you created the system, the structure, and um it's no longer you, I'm assuming, that does that all the time. You had to teach your team that, and they were people who were tradespeople, right? Who loved to do the work, and now they had to learn how to teach somebody else to embrace or understand the scope of work that they had intended to be done. How do you do that? Like, what's your process for, because I'm thinking, there's people listening to this who think, yes, I really need to have a better handoff process, or yes, I want to grow my contracting business, or yes, I want to get my team to be better at communicating that. And I'm going to ask you some more like we'll get into a little bit more detail in a second about what does that process look like. But how did you start making that transition? What was the, what was,
Well,
yeah, what did that look like?
another good question. So a couple things. One, it's kind of slow, right? You pick one thing at a time. It usually starts in the production phase. But I think one important note is it requires a level of letting go as the owner. You're working by yourself. You're in complete control of everything.
Mhm.
And as soon as you introduce new people and you start letting go, you're going to see things done not the way you would have done them. And that's a hard phase in the transition as a business grows, is that owner letting go and realizing, it's the end result. How we get there maybe isn't as important as I thought it was. And
Mhm.
so you start to let go, which allows your team to start finding their way. And that's, I think that part is what trips up many businesses from growth,
Yeah.
is they can't relinquish that control of how it gets done exactly. Um, just like even a great process has to be continually in a state of change and revision and development. As you add new people and things change, it has to evolve as well.
Yeah. As I'm listening to you, because I totally agree that that whole thing of letting go of control and the fear of somebody's not going to do it the way that I do it, and they are going to do it differently. And there's also this element, though, right, of if I let go of control, will they do it at all? And it's what I call the difference between abdicating and delegating, right? If I just abdicate it and go, it's your job to do the job handoff process, and they don't have a structure or a system in place to do that, and there's no accountability back to you, then you've kind of lobbed it over there, which I think is sometimes what is challenging about when we start to hire people, is if we don't have a structure around how to manage it for results and actually delegate a result, as opposed to kind of lob it over there and just abdicate it and go, well, now it's yours, you go do it. And then we get disappointed if they don't do it. And right, I mean, you probably
Absolutely. Yeah. So some of the things we did was, we probably had too many meetings, right? Field staff hates to be in meetings, but you need everyone in your company to kind of walk through, how do we want to do this? You want input from everyone so there's buy-in as
Mhm.
you launch this new process. If it just comes from yourself and it's like, all right, this is what I want everyone to do, generally it doesn't seem as successful as if they work to build that process together. We actually hired consultants and different professionals through the years to develop SOPs, standard operating procedures, and we did it from the phone ringing all the way through to completion of warranty. And it took years, and over those years employees came in and left. So you were always changing, and of course as you grew and your projects changed and your focuses changed, the process had to be adapted too, but a lot of the core remained the same.
So
uh,
there's two key distinctions I hear you talking about. One is be clear about what your process is. Like when you know what your process is and it's documented, right? So that it's repeatable, that it's not in everybody's head. So clear about your process. And the second thing is getting buy-in and agreement, which is absolutely, I love that. Like it's the best way, especially as you're implementing something like this, right? It's the best way to actually get people's buy-in is when they have an agreement in it, they have some input, it becomes a collaborative process with them, as opposed to, hey, here's this thing on this piece of paper. Because when we don't do it the first way, when we aren't clear about what is the process and we're not getting buy-in and agreement with our teams, what ends up happening is it becomes sort of the flavor of the week change that we want to make.
yeah.
And so people will test you and they'll find out, are you serious about wanting to do this?
Well,
Which is,
yeah, and another component of that is you have to follow your own process.
yes, yes,
Is
yes.
so the idea that, you're going to expect everyone else to do this, but well, you're going to do your own thing. You know, you have to follow your own process,
Yes.
or
Yeah.
people won't buy into the validity of
Yeah. And I think one of the easiest and best ways to do that, and I'm going to ask you to actually talk about what your what your handoff process looks like here in just a second, but like, so it's being clear about what your process is, but then also setting up the structure for managing it, which is the accountability, the meetings, like having there be a natural structure where you can follow up, right? And I know you talk about this, you talked about this when we first chatted, and then you sent me some great information too about like your meeting agendas that have specifically what are we talking about, so that all the way down to how you manage any process in your business, in this case, the handoff process, has a structure for how you're managing it, which I love because it now moves it out of, is another step of moving it out of your head of, I know what I need to have done. And now every meeting I show up having to explain that, where instead you've created a structure in your business whereby there's an agenda, there's an outline, here's how we do this meeting, here's how we do that meeting. So that's awesome. So would you just talk about, can you just dive into what is your handoff process? Sort of what does that look like at the different stages?
Sure. And so, just for clarification, when we talk about handoff process, I'm focusing on the handoff from sales to production.
Yes.
So, for us, we have a business development manager. He is working with our designer, and he is working with the customer, and he is putting the job details together. He successfully sells a project, and then it's time to start transferring that information. That's where our handoff process pretty much starts. Our first meeting, which is typically within a week of a sale, is called the post-sale handoff. And that's his chance to transfer the information that he's gathered along the design agreement phase and put it in the lap of the production manager, the selections coordinator, who in my company is also the bookkeeper, and myself. And he delivers all of the project scope details, the estimate, um, notes or changes that may have happened at the presentation, the sales presentation, and basically sets the stage for, this is what we sold and agreed to. This is the feedback we got at the meeting. These are the things we discussed. They asked about this or that, or start dates, and attempts to like regurgitate all of that information as much as possible so that it can start switching into the production phase.
Can I ask you a question about that? Like,
Sure.
so it's great. So it sounds like you have all the right people there, and you're really being very thorough about what's included, what's not included, what had us come to certain conclusions or decisions. Excuse me. Where do you keep that information? Because I would imagine it's not somebody just sitting in a meeting
Right.
regurgitating it. Like, how do you guys, because there's got to be some way to capture that all along the way so that
Yeah.
it can be communicated, it can be looked at, reviewed. Like, how does that person who's doing that handoff, how do they do that?
All right. So we'll back up a little prior to the post-sale handoff. So what we use as a definition of scope, we call the project details. It's a lengthy, very descriptive, section by section, trade by trade, from permitting and planning to deconstruction, excavation, foundation, every category laid out in order that the job goes. And it lists very specifically all the things we're doing or not doing, what might be an allowance, what might be an option not included in the contract, but has been figured out. And it walks through every detail of the job. It's, for us, it's almost like our Bible in terms of what we've agreed to do. Now, it turns out that there's three of us that review that prior to sale: the production manager,
You know
myself.
what? I'm going to
Yeah.
ask you to pause just for one
Yeah.
second.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I've permanently fixed that issue.
Thanks.
Right.
So maybe if you could just start again
Yeah,
at from the permitting process.
sure. So, well, and the question was, where do we store this information, right? So we develop a very detailed written scope of work that defines all the things that we're going to do in this job, from permitting and planning to deconstruction and all through all of the trades. And we define all our allowances or options. The information eventually will be put on our project management software, so which every employee has a login and access to. So the project manager, the business development manager, and myself all review the project details or scope of work and the estimate and the plans prior to sale.
And then what's the is that like who manages keeping that up to date, and how does like are like things assigned to people, or like how does
So
that?
yeah, so good question. So and honestly, there's some pain there in terms of like whose job is it to continue to store that information, update that information, replace existing information as it moves from the design agreement all the way through to warranty. And the challenge is that responsibility shifts along the way. It moves from one person to the next. Now, you could, if you read the details of all those agendas, you'd see notes around doing things, putting things into builder trend. And, you know, that's something that is constantly changing or reevaluating just based on the roles of different individuals in the company.
Mhm.
And, last year, a part-time employee became a full-time employee, is now one of her positions is sales assistant, and she's taking on a greater and greater role each quarter with regard to managing some of our systems and helping update and being a support um, person to the business development manager. So even though there's a process and it's written, well, now you enter a new person and it divides a particular role or job description. And so we're talking about the handoff process. I could talk for 2 more days about all the other processes that are intertwined within the handoff process, whether it's job descriptions or PTO policies or anything.
Yeah, yeah. I think you and I could have a lot of fun in this on those topics, near and dear to my heart. Well, so you've captured all of this information, and what's included, what's excluded, scope, selections, what you know, what you don't know. So you've captured all that. You keep it in Builder Trend. Is that where you're?
That's correct. We keep it in
So all
builder.
that information is in Builder Trend. You sit down and you have that initial meeting with, you said that the project manager, the person doing selections, and
And this, the sales assistant and the selections coordinator is also the bookkeeper. So
okay,
she's entering the financials. And it's not the project manager at that step. It's actually what we call the production manager or production coordinator,
okay,
who at that meeting will also determine a potential start date and who the project manager will be.
okay,
And that will set up for the next phase of the handoff, which is essentially bringing that information to the project manager.
okay.
And
So
that might,
what's the intent of that first meeting? If you were to just give a quick, what's the intent of that first meeting? Because that's
if
important, right? Of like, if
you
somebody's listening and they're like, all right, what's my goal? What's my intent there? What's the intent?
to me, the intent, the ultimate goal is that that salesperson, business development manager, project developer, whatever you want to call that position, is done. They are on to working on the next sales, and they have unloaded and communicated all the information that they've gleaned over the entire design, budgeting, and planning phase, and they've landed it in the production lap, and now they can all run with it with
Okay.
very little need to go back and ask them questions. Not that that doesn't happen, but my goal is that that person is done with that project. They've done
Okay.
everything that they're required to do. They And now production can run with it, and they can work on the next sale.
Correct. So in that's you call that a sales associate?
Yeah, that's an assistant to the salesperson or business development manager.
So are they the person who are estimating the project?
So in our business structure, the business development manager is the salesperson and estimator
Okay.
and writes the project scope.
Okay. All right. So they're the one doing the handoff at that point, and they've done the scope and they've done the estimate and they've sold the job.
Correct.
Great. Okay, cool. So that's the first meeting.
Yep.
And it does that big chunk handoff. And then tell me what happens next, because I know you have a few other.
The next meeting is one that I'm not generally at. It's what we call it's the project manager handoff, which is what we determined was that meeting I just talked about, the post handoff, trying to get a project manager in on that has not doesn't know anything about the project. It wasn't successful. That was a failure on our attempt at, oh well, why not just have them there too instead of having another meeting. Well, we determined that that wasn't going to work.
Why didn't
So
it work?
it
I'm
didn't work
curious.
because everyone in that meeting, other than the project manager, already knew a lot about the job. They had reviewed the estimate, the plans, the project details prior to sale. Project manager had no involvement, or virtually none. So they had to be brought up to speed where all of us already were. So it
Okay.
didn't make sense to have them sit there, and we'd have to bring them up to speed where that meeting typically lasts less than half an hour, and
Okay.
we were spending an hour just bringing someone up to speed. So what we
That's a
decided,
really important distinction, right?
absolutely.
Because I'm just listening from the perspective of it's somebody, if it's like a smaller firm, they don't have quite that many people. It would be maybe directly to the project manager if it was from an estimator or from the sales team to the project person, if there had not been sort of this other layer that it had this, this greater degree of involvement. So
So
that makes total sense.
yeah,
Yeah.
your point is particularly important to listeners because this is what works best for our company, the size and the number of people. I had a company that only had 3 employees. So we would have all been there. There'd just be me and the project manager. And of course, that would be the handoff.
Right.
Um, as we've grown with different levels and responsibilities, that's why your process is in constant change, really.
Mhm.
And that was just an example of us discovering that it didn't make sense to have the project manager there, even though all the information needed to get transferred to them. It just wasn't the right time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we created the next meeting, which was the project manager handoff, which only happens with the production manager, the selections coordinator, and the project manager. And that's where they start downloading. The production manager will introduce the project manager to the homeowner at that point, and really we're trying to get the project manager to start taking over the job at that point, but the schedule's still being developed by the production manager. Selections or whatnot are being input by the selections coordinator. So it's a slower transition, but they're now getting up to speed with, hey, in about 6 weeks, you're going to be starting a new project. You've got some time to learn about it, meet the customer, review things.
Yeah, I have to tell you that it's interesting as I'm listening to you. I'm thinking, wow, that's taking the time at the front end of a project to really flush out all the details. That's really what you're talking about here. And get the job set up so that it's ultimately going to run better at the back end. And I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about that when you're finished talking about your process, but I just want to kind of put a pin here because I think that sometimes people think, oh gosh, that's like so much time, or like my jobs have to start right away, because we think they have to start right away. But the truth is, goes back to what you were talking about earlier, is know your process, have a process, know your process, execute your process. And by having more of a system and more of a process at the front end for being really clear and flushing out all those details, right, makes a project run more smoothly, be more on time. There's fewer change orders, there's happier clients. I mean, there's so many benefits. Again, I'm going to ask you about that, but I just wanted to point that out because as I'm listening to you, that, and this has been true this whole conversation with you, Greg, is I really appreciate that spending the time, investing the time at the front end saves you time at the back end and makes jobs run so much more smoothly. And I've seen it time and again with contractors.
So
Anyway, go ahead. So go ahead.
I'll try not to divert too far from the next agenda in the process, but we average at least 2 to 3 times greater amount of time in the planning process than the production process. And it is an easy qualifier for us when someone calls and says, I want to start in 4 or 6 weeks. That is an immediate no for us. There's no scenario where we're going to jeopardize the value of that planning process just to start sooner, because it's going to cost everyone in the end. So
It
back to
also
the
distinguishes you from other contractors who just want to be a yes right now. And those jobs end up getting derailed at the back end. They do.
absolutely
Missed expectations, always. Yeah. All right, go ahead. Sorry.
back to the process. So now the project manager has been downloaded on the project, and they're starting to reconnect with the trade partners. Selections are happening. We're starting to get the customer out to our vendors and suppliers, making decisions, confirming schedules, and then usually about 4 to 6 weeks after that project manager gets their hands on it, we have the last in-office handoff. We call it the sales to production handoff. And essentially this is where we're still small enough, and this is probably in the next several years a meeting that may get removed, changed, adapted. The entire company comes together from laborer to owner, and we do a handoff with everyone, and we go around the table and we review all the project details, ask questions. Salesperson will again kind of talk about what types of customer they are. Do they have pets, children, little personal things that everyone might want to be aware of? Um, you know, they have 2-year-olds, they nap during the day. They asked if they could not have any work going on in the middle of the day. They're really concerned about their lawn. It could be anything, but that is really a company-wide handoff, and that is the end of basically anyone other than the production team being involved in the project much, other than questions or clarifications. And they have an on-site portion of that, and then they leave the office, just the production team, and they go on site. Everyone then gets to meet the homeowner. You'll see the agenda. They might review dumpster placement, porta potty, special requests for job site signs or material locations. They'll understand, here's a good one, what are they going to need the first day of the job, right? Instead of arriving at the job to find out what you need and then going back and getting it, like, what are you going to need? Dust protection, floor protection, all of the things that would be nicer to know. If you're out there, figure that out while you're out there.
Yeah. Yeah. Nice. Nice. Tell me, so I so so I so appreciate your thoroughness and all of that. And what it, one of the things I always say is information is so powerful in helping us have greater clarity so that we have more confidence, so that we can take more powerful actions. And when I think about like the time and energy and effort that you put into making sure that your team has that clarity so that they have more confidence to be able to like hit the ground running and be successful, that they're not kind of like dragging and figuring it out and making mistakes and bumping along and figuring it out while they're on the job. That it's not to say that they're going to remember everything or it's always perfect, no doubt, but what you've done is you've stacked the odds in their favor of everybody being happier and more successful, including the homeowner, right?
Absolutely.
um can you talk a bit about like, so I know you're a systems process thinker, and it sounds like you're a really great problem solver. When you started this process, though, and I would imagine that you haven't always been this organized and this detailed in what you do, can you just speak to the difference of when you didn't have a handoff process that was as thorough, or just a handoff process, period, versus having a handoff process? What was the difference in how your projects ran?
So great question. So the biggest difference, I'd say, is the experience from the customer side. I mean, our customers just love our process. It's so predictable. Communication is so regular. Um, and we don't get surprises. Our budgets are accurate. Our schedules are accurate. It's it literally is as close as you can get to stress free for an invasive, you know, an invasive project of ripping out a kitchen in the heart of your home. Um, but before that, you're you're spinning plates, as they say. You're bouncing around. People are getting a different experience based on how busy you are that day, or you're just you're putting more fires out. We don't have fires anymore. We um, Customers have less stress within their lives just because we can anticipate their needs and anticipate those times in a project that are more stressful. um, Whether it's within our process, the change order process, the schedule process, the weekly updates from the project manager, all these little things. I mean, we have processes, and then within all those we have little additional processes. So now, with over 20 years experience, we've weeded out a lot of those problems. So back to your question, like, what kind of pain did you experience? Well, pain of like getting called out of hours, people not knowing what was going on, suddenly having to work on the weekend for because you didn't plan well. A lot of the pain is experienced from the employees and staff of the company,
Right.
um, because of the lack of planning, um, because you're trying to make up for things that you didn't do. My team, I mean, my project managers haven't worked a single Saturday or Sunday in a decade. Like,
Yes.
we work Monday through Friday.
Yeah.
Um, we don't even, we have a policy about getting extra PTO if you get called on the weekend. I enacted it about 3 years ago. It hasn't been used yet.
That's great. That's great. It's interesting as I'm listening to you, because the most direct way to be able to grow your business is you have to grow your team. you have to have more people who are wearing those hats so that you're not wearing all of them. And part of what you've been talking about today is the whole thing of having processes that are repeatable, that other people can be successful at executing when there's consistency, when it's documented, when there's accountability for it, when there's, buy-in and agreement, right? All those things. And that the best way to build a really great team around you who actually can take ownership, who can be successful, is to be consistent, right? That consistency, have a process, know what your process is, execute it consistently. Yeah, I so appreciate this conversation. I think you've touched on so many things that are important in terms of growing a construction business and helping contractors find their next level of success and to build great teams around them. Because fundamentally, while we're talking about a change order process, what we're really talking about is how do you think of your business from the perspective of being able to scale it at all, build great teams, create great experiences, have amazing referrals. I mean, it hits on so many different things. Just doing even just this one simple thing can be such a huge difference that makes the difference in building a successful contracting business. So thank you. I so appreciate your input. Now, I know that you have a couple of things that you've shared with me that I will share with everybody watching and listening. You've given me some agendas for each of those meetings, and you've given me some job handoff checklists that I will definitely be sharing here. And before we wrap up, I guess my last question is there anything else that you would like to share with everybody that we haven't touched on or haven't asked?
Well, one thing that kind of is a benefit or result of a well documented process, commitment is it allows you, the owner, to continue to step back from your business. And, maybe 12 years ago, I took one of the many courses from someone who said, if you don't leave your business for at least 2 weeks, people will just delay decision making until you get back. So I said, all right, I'm taking a 2 week vacation this year and I'm doing it. And well, that was 12 years ago. And I've taken at least 1 2 week every year. Last week, I was away from my business last year, almost 10 weeks. Um,
Nice.
and that's without checking in, no email, no phone calls, or very limited, I should say. And that's another great benefit of processes that your team can execute. And it allows you to step back, have family time, have personal time, and allow your business to continue to thrive without you. And for many, that's a goal of as they
Absolutely.
age in their business and a
Yeah.
great benefit of doing this.
Yeah, well, that's why we start businesses in the first place, right? Like to be able to make as much money as we want to make and have the option to choose how we spend our time and to love what we do. And somewhere along the line that gets derailed. And part of what you're talking about is when you have consistent processes, when you do things consistently, when you build great teams, you have the ability to be away from your business for 10 weeks. Congratulations. That's awesome. Have you also found that you're more profitable now than you were before?
Um, yes, I would say that. I think, at least in my experience, as you grow, you get more accurate with your record keeping, job costing. And so you actually can feel more confident of your actual profitability, where some may think they're more or less profitable, but some early on, generally people aren't taking as good of record keeping, so they actually don't know. So again, get
Yeah.
into the financial process. How do we job cost? What's our system for that? I mean, this can be done in marketing, in HR, in your financials. It's there's no lack of things to write a process about. Um,
Okay.
but in the beginning, it's probably most about this handoff, changing it from yours to your one employee's, responsibility. But
Nice.
yeah, we're consistent. We know our numbers and we know them ahead of time. And we have a lot of history now, so it's very predictable for us too.
Nice, nice. So be clear, have good feedback, be consistent. Yeah.
and flexible.
Yes, always flexible. Greg, thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your experience. And thank you so much for your generosity of sharing your templates and your checklists and agendas, and very generous of you. And thank you. I've so enjoyed this conversation, and I'm so grateful for you to have shared with everybody listening and watching today.
My,
Um,
my pleasure, Vicky, and I have no problem if you share my information. If anyone wanted to follow up with questions or whatnot, be happy to spend more time.
oh, thank you. You want to give them your email address here?
Sure. My email is Greg, at lhcnh.com, as in Liberty Hill Construction, New Hampshire.com.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks. I hope you found the interview with Greg to be helpful. I am so excited to be sharing all the great resources that he has provided, and they're all below in the show notes. And if you have a story of great learning that you've had in your life as a human being, as a leader, as a manager, I invite you to please let me know. I would love to interview you. I think that our collective ability to be able to share our stories and share our experience lets us all know that we're not alone on the journey, and that we as human beings all struggle at different times. And it's out of those struggles and out of those breakdowns that we face that oftentimes come some of our greatest gifts, our greatest learning, our greatest tools, like with Greg. So, if you have, if you've never done this before, it's okay. And if you don't feel comfortable talking in public, it's okay. It's just you and me having a conversation. I would love to hear from you. Reach out to me at Vicky@suitorbusinessbuilders.com, and I'll see you next time on the Profit Builder Unscripted.